his allergies are acting up, and I'm hangry this morning, so I skipped breakfast. So if you hear pain, that's probably coming from my stomach. I don't hear myself, even though my microphone is on. But what we want to says we're good now. I still don't hear it. It should be good. Okay, there it is. All right. What I want us to think about this morning is listed on the screen before us, and that is the prayer of pain. Pain is inevitable to the human experience in a fallen world. Pain knows no partiality. It will attack people, both young and old, rich and poor, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of nationality. Pain will hit everyone. And I think in many ways that's why we've seen such advancements in the medical field. We're trying to figure out how we can alleviate human pain and suffering. How can we make life more palatable for one another? But you know, the same thing is true when it comes to the field of psychology as well. As it has continued to grow and to develop, we're trying to figure out and learn how better to process emotional and mental anguish and pain and trauma that can come upon us. And so in essence, it's all experimentation and trying to figure out how to process pain that every one of us feel. And so what we have to understand, though, as we come to this is that God never intended for us to experience pain. That's not. We've been through Genesis 1 and 2 extensively to discuss the importance of that particular principle. But because of sin's entrance into the world, we have to deal with pain. And one of the ways we deal with that pain as we watch the way it is unfolded in Scripture is that we learn to pray through our pain. Okay? So for an example, in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 15, when Hannah, she's praying, her lips are moving, but no sound is coming forth. And so he thinks, Eli thinks that she is drunk. And she says, no, that's not the case. I'm not drunk. I'm a woman of sorrowful spirit because I've been pouring out my soul before the living God. Or the superscription to Psalm 102. That is that little title, underneath the title itself, that superscription, it reads, the prayer of the afflicted, when he is overwhelmed and pours out his complaint before the Lord. There are entire psalms which, myself, I have not given them the attention that they deserve, but I hope to remedy that hopefully in the future. There is an entire category of psalms that we have neglected to our own peril, and those are the psalms of lament, where we learn how to lament. Unfortunately, we have allowed certain societal and cultural norms to tell us that, you know, if we feel pain and if we talk about our pain, that what we're actually doing is having a pity party and we're asking everyone to look at us and we're trying to get attention. And so what has become virtuous to us is to simply bury our pain. The Bible knows nothing of that. Absolutely nothing. The Bible teaches us that one of the main ways that we process our pain, and I'm not saying and I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that a person should not be under the care of a therapist or a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist. This is not about those disciplines being wrong and somehow going to see someone in those particular disciplines illustrates a lack of faith, or you should just pray through it and, you know, kind of grit your teeth without seeking help. There are multiple avenues of help, okay? And we need to be careful that we don't simply restrict all this down to one thing. We have to take holistic approaches. But learning to pray through our pain is a very important and significant step. And so what I want us to do as we're studying prayer this year through the Gospel of Luke, learning to pray the way that Jesus did, and the way that he taught and the way that he illustrated, I want us to do two simple things, one this morning and one tonight. One is simply first to look at 3 pictures in Luke's gospel of praying in the midst of pain. And then tonight I want us to, based upon that understanding of those experiences, to look at some principles, about 4 of them, to help us process pain as we pray. So as we think about this, number 1, the first example was read for us a moment ago. That is a few verses in that particular section of Zacharias and Elizabeth, who are the parents of John the Baptist. In the days of Herod, he was appointed in roughly 40 BC, although he did not arrive to take control until about 37. And then he died in 4 BC. And people say, I thought Jesus was born when Herod was alive. He is, but our modern dating system is off, okay? That's why you have Herod dying at 4 BC. Jesus technically was not born at AD 1. He was technically born, if you keep the inaccurate system, he would have been born, well, before 4 BC. Anyway, that's its own thing. We'll leave it alone. So here he is, he's reigning, and then you have Zacharias and Elizabeth. He is a priest, and it says he's of the course of Abijah. When you look at 1 Chronicles 24, you have the multiplication of priests. And so David sorted them into orders, okay? You have thousands upon thousands of priests. If you have that many people working in the temple at the same time, the temple itself is only a structure of about 2,500 square feet, okay? So you can imagine, the average American home is roughly 2,500 square feet. You can imagine trying to fit thousands of people together and serving in this larger temple precinct. And so David divides them into orders in which they will come 2 weeks a year, okay? 2 weeks a year for their regular service, and then their 3 major feast days, all the priests will converge upon the temple, and there they will serve. It seems like that Zacharias, who is, of course, the course of Abijah, which he's the 8th course, and it seems like he's serving a normal course. There doesn't seem to be any indication in the text that we're dealing with a major feast day or anything like that. So there he is, and we're introduced to the fact that he's married to Elizabeth, both of them extremely righteous people, but they had no child, okay? They have no child. Elizabeth was barren, echoing the words of Genesis 11, where you talk about Sarai's barrenness, or 1 Samuel chapter 1, where you deal with Hannah's barrenness. And so there are a number of motifs that start moving around when you see a lot of things are converging together, but here she is, and they are experiencing together infertility. And you can imagine the pain of such. We today have taken great steps toward trying to alleviate some of the issues of infertility. But you have to remember that even in this culture, to experience infertility was not just the fact that you couldn't have children. It was in some circles, I'm not going to say in all Jewish circles, but in some circles and in many people, inevitably you're always going to have a handful of knuckleheads who think their thinking is just absolutely crazy. But there is a view that says if you are barren, then God must find some kind of disfavor within you. For an example, when Elizabeth learns that she is pregnant in verse 25, and she tells everyone she's pregnant basically, she says this, "Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked upon me to take away my reproach among people." She's acknowledging the social stigma, the spiritual stigma that's attached to her infertility. And then the same thing being true with Zacharias. What was going on? Why couldn't they produce a child? And they're both well advanced in years. Now, how old they are, that's a question. Be cautious about how much we read into well advanced in years. According to Numbers chapter 4 and verse 3, when we're dealing with the Levites, you remember the individuals that served in the tabernacle era and the precincts and things along those lines, that they were permitted to serve from the ages of 30 to 50. Okay? 30 to 50. After that, their time was over. Now, Zacharias is obviously still serving in the temple. So when it says that he is an older man, he's well advanced in age, when life expectancy is maybe a little over 40 at the time, he is advanced in age. But he's still, according to our standards, still relatively young. So somewhere between the ages of 30 and 50. And so you kind of have to wonder if they had given up hope in this process. Now he goes, and on this particular day, he is chosen. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You were only allowed to serve. Incense was offered in the morning and in the evening every day at the temple. And you were only allowed as a priest in your course, in your order, to do it one time in your lifetime. This happened to be the day that Zacharias was going to do it. Now what's interesting is the prayer overtones are all throughout this text. The incense itself represented prayer. When God gave instructions to construct the tabernacle, in Exodus chapter 30, the altar of incense, you remember you had the veil that separated the holy place and the most holy place. The altar of incense was placed right outside that veil. And then when you would drop the incense onto the burning coals, you would see smoke begin to rise. Okay? Now, sitting behind the veil is God, who sits between the cherubim on the the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And the symbol is that the incense rising, the smoke rising, was the prayers of the saints being wafted toward the throne of God. In Revelation chapter 5 and verse 8, it comes out and says it very explicitly. They're carrying around a bowl full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And so it's a very significant time of prayer. And then you remember when Zacharias comes out of the temple, it says it is the hour of prayer, and the people were waiting for him. But then the angel appears to him and, of course, startles him, and then he says this. He said, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard." Your prayer has been heard. I mean, what is the simple implication of that statement? You've been praying about it. You and your wife have been praying. You've been praying to have a child. No doubt they had prayed dealing with the social stigmas that went along with it. The amount of cruel things that people can say and do. It's hard to fathom the pain that they struggled with. Think about, it kind of makes you, he says your prayer is heard, which gives the notion that it's something that they've been continuously praying about. But you also have to wonder, as with any circumstance, at some point do you not look up and go, okay, maybe this is never going to happen. Maybe I just need to stop. But finally, all of the prayers and all of the times that he would pray with his wife or pray by himself, here it is, it's coming together, and they are both processing the difficulty, they're processing the pain through prayer, talking to God, no doubt, about the ups and downs of it all. So there's one picture where they pray through their pain and they get the answer that they desire at a time that no one expected. But then number two, the second example, the last two examples will center around Jesus himself. The next one deals with Jesus in the garden, but before we get to the Garden of Gethsemane, we have to understand a thought that is progressing throughout Luke's gospel. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus begins to tell them that he's going to suffer many things and be crucified. Luke 9, beginning in verse 21. It says, "And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed and on the third day be raised." Now he's known this all along, but he's just now for the first time revealed it to the disciples. A lot of people get the notion that, if I could just know how my life was going to turn out, I'd be okay. Really? If you knew the exact date and the exact cause of your death, you really think you would have peace? Or would you spend your time always looking for it, always thinking, I'm counting down to it. I've got this much time left. I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss this, to go through and to deal with all of the, there are mountains of literature, there are movies that have been made dealing with this principle that show you the torturous effect of it. So Jesus knows that this is going to happen to him. And he knows exactly when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. You think he feels the weight of it? Well, that's the first mention of it. Wait, and let's go over a little bit more. Stay in Luke 9 in verse 43. But while they were all marveling at everything he was doing, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand the saying, and it was concealed from them that they might not perceive it, but they were afraid to ask him about the saying. And so here he is again, mentioning it to his disciples just on the heels of having already mentioned it. Now imagine knowing that you're going to die a horrendous death, telling it to the people that you have entrusted and you have mentored, and they don't understand what you're saying. Then we come to chapter 12. Beginning in verse 49, Jesus says, "I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it was already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished." Baptism, a full immersion. The idea behind the word baptism itself doesn't necessarily carry the connotation of water. It's contextual. It's the idea of submersion. You could be submerged in all kinds of stuff. Here, it's the baptism of suffering, to be immersed in pain from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. I have a baptism to be baptized with. I'm going to be completely overwhelmed by suffering. And listen to him. For people who think the cross was easy for Jesus, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. The idea behind the word distressed is two words that carry with it the idea of putting pressure on, squeezing. Squeezing. How great is my distress? How much pressure do I feel all the time knowing what's in front of me? Especially when you continue to trace the other thing that we've done many times in Luke's Gospel of Jerusalem, which is the place where it would be accomplished, and how he talks about that continuously. Or what about chapter 22 and verse 15, when he's instituting the Lord's Supper, but he's at the Passover, and he says this, beginning in verse 14, "And when the hour came, he reclined at table, and his apostles with him, and he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." I have this compelling thing to bring you to an understanding of what my suffering is going to be before I actually enter into the suffering. Now, feeling the weight, feeling the intensity of the cross as it's kind of like a monster that just keeps growing, and it gets bigger and bigger the closer he gets, and he feels the weight of that pressing in upon him. In verse 39 it says, "And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, Pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them a stone's throw. And he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he arose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. What is Jesus doing? People say he's praying. Well, yes. Why? Because he's in pain. Because he hadn't been crucified yet. There is more. I realize that to some people, psychological pain is not real in their minds. I realize that with some people. I couldn't disagree more with that notion. And I think it was only a matter of time before the people who deny it experience it, and then they will begin to understand how real it is. Jesus feels the pain. He feels the pressure of it all. Because the notion that we have built up amongst, again, culturally, especially amongst the men in America, is we don't talk about our pain. Nope, I'm okay. I'm all right. That's what men do. Well, just think about something. Jesus came to earth as an embodied man, male. Is anybody really willing to argue that Jesus is not the embodiment of everything that was perfect, the perfect image of manhood? Is anybody really willing to argue that point? That Jesus was not the zenith of what manhood should be. You see, the irony of a person who says, no, I don't struggle with these things and I'm not going to deal with them. I'm just going to keep suppressing them. They think they're the strong ones. They're the ones who are afraid to confront their feelings. They're driven by fear, not by strength. One of the hardest things in the world to do is to confront what life can do to you. And to really admit how bad it hurt you. Jesus did not have the notion, well, it's the cross, it's why I'm here. I'm not going to cry about it all day. I'm just going to, walk into it. This is what you do. So it says in verse 41, it says he withdrew from them. Now when you look at this particular word in the original and its usage in other places, it carries with it the idea of being emotionally drawn away. He was driven. That there are moments in life, look, here he is, from other accounts we know he has his disciples with him minus Judas. He takes 3 more with him and then he goes even further. There are certain moments in life where you just have to get away from everybody else. You just have to withdraw. And as great as people are who are comforters, at some point they can't live with me forever. At some point, I'm going to have to face my pain alone. So here he is being withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed. The most common Jewish custom was standing. He knelt. Other Gospels illustrated as him falling on his face, falling to the ground. It's almost as if it's communicating the notion that his knees gave out on him. The weight of something was so heavy, his knees gave out on him. And in the midst of that pain, he then goes and saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Now let's think through that phrase a little bit. Father, the intimate relationship. No matter how old a man gets, no matter how much he tries to think about how wonderfully independent he is from his father, there is still a little boy inside of every man that wants to make their daddy happy. That his nod of approval, his voice still means something even if we didn't have the best relationship. Jesus and the Father had the perfect relationship. And he walked into that garden and collapsed and said, Father, if you are willing, playing on no doubt times in the Old Testament when this happened, when Moses interceded that God not destroy the people of Israel, or when Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and wept because he learned from Isaiah that he was going to die. If you're willing, let this cup pass from me. The cup, in a great portion of Old Testament literature, dealt with the cup of God's wrath, the cup of suffering, like Jeremiah 25 and verse 15. He knew what he was about to enter into. He knew what being baptized in pain was going to be about. And what does he say? If you are willing, remove this cup from me. What is Jesus saying? I don't want to. Now, is Jesus weak? No. We have got to get rid of the notion that strength and courage means the absence of fear. Without fear, there can be no courage, because there is nothing you are conquering. To have courage, its prerequisite is to be afraid. And here is Jesus saying that. I'm afraid. I feel the distress in my soul. I've been longing to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. It's here. It's like a tyrant that's taunting me. But he's willing to submit and say, but I'm willing to do it your way. Your way is the way that matters. Then there are textual variants in 43 and 44. Some questions exist about them. That's a whole different discussion. But there appeared to him an angel from heaven strengthening him. In what way? Who knows? And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. He prayed harder. So much so that the sweat drops that were falling from his head looked like they resembled a drop of blood in size. You think Jesus, like we said a couple of weeks ago, you look at Hebrews 5:7, he offered up his prayers with loud crying and tears. You think Jesus thinks this is just a walk in the park? So before he enters into the physical suffering, the weight of it is bearing down upon him. But then as his suffering begins to come to a close, he's praying still. Many times the statements that he makes from the cross that we can study, he makes 7 of them that we have recorded. A majority of them are really prayers. Okay? So listen to what is said of him in verse 44. It said, it was now the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And when the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. So there's darkness over the whole land. We talked about this last week. The idea of God's judgment coming in. The veil is rent, the opening of heaven. And it says, then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father. See how many times he calls him Father in these final moments. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I thank you, Holy Father. Luke 10:21. On and on he goes. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. What is Jesus saying? Well, he's doing exactly what we studied last week. He's just quoting from a different text. He's quoting Scripture. This is Psalm 31:5. Where most likely the psalmist is David, dealing with, most people believe, Absalom's rebellion. But either way, he's going through a difficult time, and all his enemies are encroaching upon him. And he says to God, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." That is, I trust you, God, to judge me righteously. They're not judging me righteously. Notice he says, "Into your hands." Into your hands I commit my spirit. Listen, when he was predicting his death in 9:44, what did he say? The Son of Man is about to be delivered over to the hands of sinners. In the hands of sinners, they perpetrated injustice. In the hands of sinners, they tortured him. And Jesus said, knowing that all of this was incorrect, knowing he's done nothing deserving of it, he says what? This is what the hands of men have done to me, but it's into your hands. The righteous judge of all the earth, who will always do the right thing, into your hands I commit my spirit. If these people get the last word, if they tell my story, they will get it wrong. And I know they've gotten it wrong, and I'm trusting you, God. That you won't let them win. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody is absolutely lying through their teeth about you? Going around behind you and telling people that you have done something you have not done, you have said something that you have not said, that you believe something you do not believe? I have. And it can be one of the most infuriating and frustrating things in all this world. Jesus is saying, I'm going to trust you. What's interesting is throughout Jewish history, this phrase became, this part of the psalm became an evening prayer that every Jew prayed before he fell asleep. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. What is Jesus doing? He's praying the prayer that he's prayed from the time he was born. What is he doing? He's in mind-numbing pain. Mind-numbing pain. Soul-crushing pain. And what does he do? He remembers the first prayer he ever learned. About trusting God to do what is right. I've often wondered what Mary thought when she heard that. She was there, right? And you know what? God kept his word. He says, into your hands I commit my spirit. What happens in Luke 24? That spirit comes back into that body. And that body gets up and walks out. Pain cannot be avoided. As much as it hurts, as frustrating, as paralyzing, as all the emotions that go along with being in pain, you can't run from it. You got to walk right into the mouth of it. And when you pray, God walks with you in it. You see, that's the thing that one of the many things that separates Christianity from so many other religions. In religions of the world, suffering is something that humans experience that the gods do not experience. It's beyond them. They're not touched by it. Christianity is the only religion where it says your God is not only moved by suffering, he said, I will willingly come down and suffer just like you. So that when you call to me, you'll have somebody who knows. That's Hebrews 4 and verse 15. He can sympathize with our weaknesses. And looking at Jesus, looking at other faithful disciples throughout the centuries, as they have walked through pain, what did they do? They simply prayed in their pain. People say it doesn't make any sense because sometimes the pain doesn't necessarily go away. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight, but I would say this. We've got to replace the notion that prayer is transactional. I asked it, you gave it to me, or you didn't give it to me. That's not what prayer is. Prayer is relational. I asked it. I just showed you my heart. But I also trusted that you know better than that. And whatever your answer was, I trust that answer. God has entered into our pain and conquered our pain through his own pain. And that's what he teaches us. The pain of sin, the pain of suffering, the pain of difficulty, it's all there. And Jesus entered into our pain to deliver us. It makes you want to serve him. Because sin is painful and it hurts. And if a person is willing to come to Jesus with their sin and be willing to let him take it, to let it go, with a penitent faith confessing him, to be immersed in water, to be baptized into his death, to meet him there, and to leave all that sinfulness behind, so that then we'll come forth like he did in newness of life. He'll take away the greatest pain the world has ever known. And then he'll deal with all the consequences of that pain in time. If we can help you this morning, we want to as we stand and sing this song.